Hello. In this video we're going to continue our journey through the practical work that we go through in Microsoft's Dashboard in a Day course, working on the basic ideas in Power BI. In the last one we had connected to our data, and then we did some basic transformations in Power Query, focusing on things like making sure that the data types were all correct in all of the different fields in our data sets, doing some slightly more complex transformations in the geography and manufacturer tables. In this video we're going to do a simple database transformation doing an append. The US data comes in one CSV file, and then the international data is put separately into another table. That's not very convenient for working in the data model in Power BI. Really, it would be much easier if all of that data were in one long table. So we're going to do an append, adding the international data onto the end of the US data. Unfortunately, in the Dashboard in a Day course, we don't have an opportunity to do the other kind of database operation, which is a merge, or in SQL terms, a join. So what I'm going to do next after this video is to explain, first of all, how different types of database join work in an SQL context, and then I'm going to do another video with a slightly more complex data set than the Dashboard in a Day one, showing you how we can do an append and a merge to get all of our data together. But in this video it's really simple. We're just going to do a straightforward append. So if I switch over to my data, this is where we got to at the end of the last video, and here is my US sales data, here is my international sales data. So if we're going to be able to append those two files into one table, we need to check that the two tables have the same structure. Namely, they have to have the same headers in the same order, and that the data types must be the same. So product ID, date, zip, units and revenue in the US sales data, and exactly the same columns in the international sales data, except that in the international sales data we also have a country column that's been added on the end. Let's check the data types. So whole number, date, text, whole number and fixed decimal number, and exactly the same data types in the international sales data. So it looks as if, apart from the fact that we have a country column in the international sales data that we don't have in the US sales data, everything looks compatible. Okay, so let's just go straight ahead and do our append operation. So we start by selecting one of the tables, one of the queries that we want to start with. So I'll just select the US sales data to start with, and then on the ribbon on the Home tab in Power Query we have this button here, Append Queries. If you have a smaller screen, you'll find that the names of the groups will be compressed into buttons. So here I would have to press the Combine button first to be able to see the Merge and Append buttons underneath, and that would give me access to the button I really want. But luckily my screen is fairly large, so I don't have to do that. We also have two different ways of doing it. When I click on the drop down next to the main Append Queries button, I can do an ordinary Append Queries, or I can do an Append Queries as new. The difference is, if I do Append Queries starting with sales, it will just add the international sales data on the end of the original data in the sales query, and so I will end up with the same number of queries as before, and the append operation will be added as some applied steps on the end of the existing sales table. But if I say append queries as new, first it will make a copy of the query that I select and then add the new data to the copy. So I will get a new query with the combined data in, and I will still have access to the previous versions of the separate data, which is the way that I would prefer to do it. So I'm going to say append queries as new. And there are two different versions of the dialog box. A simple one, which we're looking at here, where we only have two tables, and then if we have more than two, then we can add all of the tables that we want to append together into the box on the right by selecting them on the left and clicking the add button. But I only got two tables, so let's use the simple one. So my first table is the US sales data, just called sales, and then for the second table I select that one. So now we just click OK, and we can now see what has happened to the country column that was in the international sales data but not in the sales data. It has added that for us, and where we have the US records, it's just left that column blank. So we can see here, might need to change the column profiling so it's based on the entire data set. Let's do that. Column profiling based on entire data set. If I do that, now I'll be able to filter on the entire data set. So if I click on the filter for country and then say load more, because it says the list may be incomplete, should be able to see the records for the other countries. You can see it's loading Australia, Japan, and so on. So the nulls correspond to the US records, and the other ones are spelt out as we expect. So all I have to do now is just to replace those nulls with the text USA. So I need to select that column, and then on transform I need to say replace values, and I'll type, making sure that I get the case right, null, all in lowercase, because remember the M programming language is case sensitive, and I want to replace that with USA. Right, so all of those null records are now replaced by USA, and if I check my filters now and say load more, there shouldn't be any nulls left. Right, no nulls. Good. Fine, so there's just one other little thing that I want to do, which is to make sure that the sales data only goes between 2017 and 2019. I don't want to import more than that data into the data model. Also, actually, there's one other little thing, isn't there? We need to rename this query. Let's call it all sales. And so if I want to only load data from 2017, 2018 and 2019 into the data model, I can just apply a filter to the date column here. So I'm going to say date filters between, and so it needs to be equal to or after 1/1/2017, first day of 2017, and before or equal to the last day of 2019, remembering that my dates are in UK format, so international format, with the day of the month first. So that's going to be 31/12/2019. And my yellow warning triangles have disappeared, showing that those are valid dates. So now when I say OK, that's applied a filter, and now when I load my data into the data model, that should be exactly the set of records that I want. Fine, so we're done. That's the only database operation we need to apply. So let's go back to the Home tab and load the data into the data model. Close and apply. So when it's finally finished loading, I end up with 6 tables that I can see in my data pane here, and if I go to model view in the Power BI window, I can see my 6 tables there. So we need to do a little bit of tidying up, for example with the geography table, but there's something else fundamentally wrong. So I wonder if you'd like to just pause the video and think for a moment, what is wrong here? I've got something fundamentally wrong. So the problem is that I have my sales data twice over. I have the US sales data in this table and in the combined table, and I have the international sales data in this table and also in the combined table, and I don't want it twice over. I only want my data once. So really what I want to do is to stop the data loading into the data model. There are other ways to do it. I could simply hide the earlier versions of the data, so I could select a table here, and then in the properties pane I can say is hidden, and you can see that the I symbols now are all crossed out. And that's a slightly simpler way to do it. If I click on the sales table here, I can just click on the I, and that also will hide it. So as you can see, we can still see it in model view, but it's now hidden from report view. So if I go to report view, I can't see those two tables any longer in the data pane on the right. But there's a more fundamental way to hide the data from the previous steps, which is actually to go back to Power Query and to stop it loading into the data model in the first place. So I prefer to do it that way. Let's go back to Power Query by clicking on Transform Data, and then we'll find the two queries that had the preliminary separate US and international sales. Right click on first of all the US one, and then remove the tick where it says Enable Load. And you'll see that the text for the name of the query now goes italic. And if I just right click again to check that the tick has been removed, it has. And I want to do the same thing for the international sales query. So right click, disable the load. So I've still got my all sales table there. Now when I say close and apply, those two tables that I didn't want disappear even from model view. So of course the data is all still there, it's all in the all sales table now, but I don't need it twice over in the other two tables as well. Good, so we are ready now to, with a slight diversion in the next two videos, to show you how to do merging and to explain what joins mean. We're now ready to start working in the data model itself, but next two videos are going to explain about how the other sorts of database operations are going to work, and that's going to be using a different data set. Okay, see you in the next one.